I'd like to continue talking about the refugee crisis following the war. So, as I explained earlier, we have people moving all over the place, and ultimately, it became the responsibility of the UN and a special organization. And remember, the UN is a newly organized group following the war that was based partly or solely on some of the aspects or some of the groups of the League of Nations. And this new organization, the United Nations, formed a committee called the UNRRA. And it's basically a committee that was to deal with relief and refugees administration. And who is going to pay for this particular organization, of course, is going to be mainly from U.S. funds and with a lot of U.S. backing. But the U.S. was afraid to have this as an organization that was solely run by the U.S., so there was French and British and other allied nations involved in this administration of this relief effort that happens. And in each of the zones of occupation, what is known as displaced person camps are set up, DP camps. And in the DP camps, their main objective, the first objective is food. And this is a very difficult operation in the beginning because, they're following the tales of the U.S. Army that was waging a war against Germany. So this organization wasn't set up to feed millions of people. The U.S. Army is giving aid to this UN organization, try to create a controlled environment for these DPs and to help in the assistance of giving food. And in the beginning, they have a terrible time just acquiring food. How are they going to get all this food? You have Europe, which is whose agricultural production has been reduced significantly. In some places, almost barely feeding even a small percentage of the population. And the U.S. is going to eventually ship food and care packages type to the DP camps, but this is going to take a while to be set up. And in Germany, the major DP camps will be set up in Germany, and they're going to try to extract food from the local population. So imagine this, you're a UN aid worker, and you're going to send a team of people, and generally U.S. soldiers and others, off into these little villages in Germany, and by gun, putting guns to the local administration to give us, so much grain per day, or so much pork per day, or whatever. And what happens, of course, under this situation is this black market flourishes all over the DP camps and of Europe because not enough food is out there. You have a reduced quantity of food, so prices will go up, and corruption is going to go right with it. And the DP camps in the beginning are a tenuous organization to handle what's going on. They can't handle the military aspect of this, the police aspect of it, gaining food, trying to give care. And if you look at the diaries of some of the UN workers, they're ill-informed about who the people are that they're taking care of. They don't understand the hostilities between certain groups. So, for example, in areas of the Ukrainians and Poles were mortal enemies during the war. There was a civil war had broken out during World War II in this area. So to house these people in the same barracks is asking for fighting and killing and all kinds of crazy things. Eventually, it'll get better. The concentration camp victims are a highlight of how ill-prepared they were in terms of what had happened and what they should do. And the first few months, the concentration camp victims, many of them are still in the camps. And maybe they've been provided with some new clothing, but some are going to be wearing those ridiculous concentration camp garbs, prisoners' garbs, these loose, striped clothing, without shoes, still not getting enough food and under armed guard. In this case, in many cases, U.S. or other Allied soldiers, and I mentioned briefly in one of the posts, but it sets up a situation of them being viewed as prisoners and not as people who have been under, terrible distress for 6 years. And a U.S. private tries to expose what was happening to these concentration camp victims, and eventually started this letter writing campaign. And it makes its way finally to President Truman, who couldn't believe that these camp victims are being treated so poorly, and he wanted to authenticate that story. So he sends the dean of the University of Pennsylvania Law Center off to Europe to try and confirm what was happening to these Jewish survivors. And this is almost 4 or 5 months after the war, and this man Harrison comes back with a report that says that basically we're treating the concentration camp victims as bad as the Nazis, without the extermination part of it. And thousands were dying because they weren't being well fed. Many were being treated as enemy soldiers or enemy of the Allied forces. So it's like these bizarre, ironic situations. So, for example, Hungarians who were concentration camp survivors are treated as enemy nationals because they looked at their papers and said, oh, they're Hungarians. The Hungarians were against the Allies for a major portion of the war. So here they were, these people who were treated as aliens in their own country and persecuted as aliens in their own country. Then their rescuers are going to treat them as the countrymen of the people who just persecuted them. So it was this crazy situation. After the Harrison report came out, everything changed from that point, and money and aid finally went to these people. But unfortunately, we lost many survivors, people who could have made it, again, because of this poor treatment and not knowing what was going on, a lack of history, a lack of foresight of how they should try and help these people. And eventually camps are going to be made specifically for Jewish victims who, some of them, for example, who were Orthodox and wanted to keep kosher and have a kosher kitchen and such on the camp. These camps for the Jewish survivors in particular become long-standing when they're waiting to be placed in another country eventually. And the culture organizations underneath the camps actually begin to flourish. They develop schools and art centers and many other organizations, and even a university in the DP camp system that was authorized. And people, it's amazing what people will do to reestablish their lives, and they're trying to do chemistry experiments and all these other things. People who are going to be future scientists or doctors, and they want to get back to life. They want to get back to working and living again, and so that's part of the DP camp system. Another part of the DP camp system is, again, all these people from Eastern Europe who are afraid to go back to Soviet-controlled Eastern Europe and wanting a new world to go to somewhere else, Australia, South America, the U.S., as the world economy booms after World War II, which was unexpected for many nations. These people are going to be sucked up, basically, from nations around the world because, hey, here's cheap labor. We're going to bring these people in. And they're going to come into factory jobs all along the East Coast, all the way up through Canada, and in Australia and such. But there's also kind of some strange things that go on with that. There's, for example, the Australians came in, and they go through the camps looking for people that look like them. So they were looking for blue-eyed, blonde refugees that would be suitable in Australia. And we look back on that. This is it just seems unbelievable. We have these terrible scenes of the concentration camps, and then you have the Australians coming through looking for blue-eyed blondes. But this is the irony and the scenario of that era, and sometimes it's very hard for us to grasp. But that was seen as acceptable. So that's a little bit about what happened following the war in terms of these people. But generally, millions will eventually go off to the rest of the world.